Hello and welcome to Buffy and the Art of Story. If you love the Buffyverse and you love creating stories or just taking them apart to see how they work, you're at the right podcast. I am Lisa M. Lilly. Today I'm talking about Warzone, Season 1, Episode 20 of Angel, where Angel gets in the midst of a war between vampires and street kids who hunt vampires, led by a new character, Charles Gunn. I am Lisa M. Lilly, author of the Awakening Supernatural thriller series, the QC Davis Mysteries, and the Writing as a Second Career books for writers. You can find all of those and back episodes of Buffy and the Art of Story, including those that cover Buffy the Vampire Slayer, at lisalilly.com. That's lisally.com. Along with a recap of Warzone, I'll talk about two new characters, Gunn, for whom this episode may be an origin story, and David Nabbit, a billionaire, how the plot and subplot echo the same themes, how much practical reality a hero should have to deal with, and my episode rating on a scale of 0 to 10. There will be no spoilers for Angel, but I do talk about all of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from time to time. So if you have not watched that entire series, proceed with caution. Okay, let's dive into the Hellmouth, or maybe just Los Angeles. Warzone aired the first time on May 9, 2000. It was written by Gary Campbell and directed by David Stratton. There was a Buffy episode in between Warzone and Sanctuary, the last Angel episode I covered, where Angel crossed over to Buffy the Vampire Slayer to mostly apologize to Buffy, or at least try to make things right after how badly they left things at the end of Sanctuary. That episode is the Yoko Factor. If you want to hear my breakdown of that, you can scroll back in this podcast feed, check it out on YouTube, or go to my author website. I chose not to cover it here because the Yoko Factor doesn't really change anything from the perspective of Angel, the series. Angel probably feels a little better about Buffy after it, but plot-wise, it does not make any difference. The Warzone starts with conflict, as any good story should. A young woman who we find out later is Alana walks alone at night in a deserted neighborhood, lots of warehouses and alleys. Three vampires approach, about to attack. She looks frightened, but then one of them turns around suddenly, looks behind him and says, "You." And the camera starts at the ground level, shows us boots, a long coat like Angel's. We think this is another opening where Angel is going to save someone, but instead it is a young black man, Charles Gunn, we'll find out later, and he asks if they were expecting someone else. The scene cuts to Cordelia, Wesley, and Angel walking into a very fancy party. Cordelia can smell the money. She misses that smell. Angel tells Wesley she's serious, hide some money in the office sometime and watch her. It's uncanny. They approach David Nabbit, a software billionaire. He's sitting alone at his own party, picking at some hors d'oeuvres. Angel asks him if it's a bad time, but he tells him, Cordelia said Angel could only meet at night. And Nabbit goes on that Cordelia said they'd be less conspicuous meeting at the party. Cordelia gives Angel a bit of a sheepish look, but David Nabbit doesn't seem to mind at all. He confesses he doesn't know most of the people there. He is not that great at talking to people. He jokes that he always said he would make $1 billion in software and learn to talk to girls, and he's still working on part 2. He is being blackmailed, which is why he called Angel Investigations. One or the other of these scenes could be seen as the story spark or inciting incident that gets the main plot rolling. The main plot here is the story of Charles Gunn. That's where we're going to spend the most time. So the encounter between him, Alana, who we find out is his sister, and the vampires sets off that story. At the same time, Angel's intersection with Gunn happens because of David Nabbit. We really have two subplots here for Angel. One is helping Nabbit, and the other is set off when he encounters Gunn. For now, David Nabbit asks if the team is familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, and Angel says, yeah, I've seen a few. Wesley interjects, you mean the role-playing game? And Angel says, oh, game. Nabbit tells him he played a lot in high school. Cordelia asks, did someone find out he's a big nerd? And he tells them, well, no, that's public record. Nabbit and his friends started taking the romancing exotic demon princesses part of Dungeons and Dragons seriously. And he is very awkward as he shares all of this. He says that one of them heard about this place where they could meet real demon princesses, and Wesley helps him out, chiming in that they went to Madame Dorian's. He's familiar with it from the Watchers Council. And Nabbit says he just went once or twice. Angel asks how many, and Nabbit says 12 times. And Angel finishes, people know about you going there. Nabbit says just his friends, but he already knows who has incriminating photos of him. His security people identified a guy named Lenny Edwards. The problem is they can't find him. And Nabbit's very concerned if his shareholders should see these photos and find out about him going to Madame Dorian's. Cordelia assures him they're discreet and they'll mingle for a few hours so no one suspects anything. Nabbit says hi to someone else that he doesn't know. He did that earlier in the party, and he comments that when he moved to LA, he thought it would be all glamour and parties, but there's a whole other world that no one sees, and Angel says more than one. The scene cuts to one of those other worlds. Charles Gunn and his friends are facing off against these vampires. It turns out Alana was bait. They use a truck that is equipped with giant stakes and what almost looks like a cannon to fire more huge stakes. They have tons of weapons. They put up a really good fight against these vampires and dust two of them in the air as the vampires are lunging toward them. They shoot with this cannon and kill the vampires. But one of the humans is badly wounded. The vampires who are left run. One of what I'll call the street kids, because that's how the episode refers to them, starts to run after the vampires, and Gunn pulls him back. They have to help their injured friend. They all get in the truck and go to this old warehouse where they live, get inside, and lock up. In the meantime, Angel goes to the demon brothel. The owner tells him no vampires. But when he says one of her clients is being blackmailed, which won't be too good for business, she is willing to talk with him. She calls over the demon who was with Nabbit. That demon really admires Angel. She'll even make an exception to the no vampire rule if he doesn't do that face thing. But he just wants information. In that warehouse, Alana argues with Gunn about what happened to Bobby, the very badly injured street kid who has now died of his wounds. It happened so quickly they couldn't get him to a hospital or get medical help. Gunn does not want to talk about it, and she says, well, Bobby died. And Gunn responds, everybody dies. I'm just trying to make sure that when we die, we stay dead. This is a bit of foreshadowing for what happens later. Alana says Gunn has gotten reckless, that he's insisted on chasing the vampires when they had 3 weeks without them. She worries that he loves the fight too much and he'll get killed. He tells her that's never going to happen. The friend that Gunn sent to track the vampires found their nest. It's only 4 blocks away, but another one of the group warns them all that there is a vampire heading their way, jumping from rooftop to rooftop. The scene cuts to Angel. He is confronting the blackmailer, Lenny Edwards, who it seems is human. Edwards asks what Angel wants. Angel quips a little, though not in the lighthearted way that Buffy does. He says he wants love, family, a place to call his own, but he'll never have those things. And if Edwards doesn't answer the questions right, he'll never have them either. Angel demands the Nabbit photos. Edwards says Angel's not from around there. He can tell, but Angel goes into vamp face and really threatens Edwards. He says he's moving in, taking over the area, and he will dog Edwards until he turns over the photos. Gunn and one of his friends watch from a ways away and see that Angel's a vampire threatening a human. The friend comments on this vampire moving in, and Gunn says he won't be staying too long. Somewhere around here, we typically see the first major plot turn in a story. For Gunn and his friends, I think the turn is finding that nest. That will set Gunn on a path to try to eliminate these vampires. But Angel and Gunn encountering one another, or at least Gunn seeing Angel, also is key to the story, because Angel will end up being something of a part of Gunn's story, and it definitely turns Angel's subplot, and as we'll see, significantly affects him. At the office, David Nabbit gives Cordelia and Wesley a giant check for their expenses to date. He tells them what they did at the party meant a lot to him. They're puzzled, but he means just that they hung out with him. Wesley says he was paying them, but David says he does that all the time, and they actually spent some time with him, unlike most people he pays. On seeing the amount of the check, Wesley warns David Nabbit that they're not done yet. So Angel has found Edwards, but he doesn't have the photos yet. But Nabbit believes in rewarding good work, tells them to call him David. Cordelia likes that name. It has a strong masculine feel and feels good in your mouth. Wesley tells him he won't be disappointed in their work. He walks Cordelia away and says, "Feels good in your mouth?" And she says, well, she got flustered. At night, Lenny Edwards waits by his car with an envelope of photos. Angel appears, but Edwards brought a demon with him. The demon is really strong. They fight as Edwards watches. Angel is getting really battered. We can see that it's becoming harder for him to fight, but he does manage to kill the demon and to grab the photos. Edwards runs off. Angel is crouched to the ground, bent over in pain, and just as he manages to get to his feet, a giant stake hits him from behind. It's one of those shot from Gunn's truck, but it missed his heart. Gunn and his friends chase Angel in the truck. He is staggering. If it wasn't his show, I would have been worried that he would be killed. The truck follows him, and he gets into a building. He thinks he's safe, but one of those giant stakes comes straight through the wall. Eventually, one of the street kids manages to confront Angel face to face. They fight. Angel clearly could kill the guy with his own stake, but he drops the stake and runs. Then the group follows, finds him, and before they can start fighting, he grabs Alana and holds her in front of him. Gunn yells at everyone not to shoot. Angel asks what they're playing at and tells them they're going to get themselves killed. Gunn says they'll kill him first, and another one of the kids wants to dust Angel. Angel lets Alana go. She falls against the wall, and that guy shoots. He has bad aim, though. His arrow goes straight toward Alana. Angel stops it with his hand, says, "Ow," and that he gets the impression they don't like him. He pulls the arrow out and says maybe he's just overreacting, and he points out he just saved Alana's life. Now he offers some suggestions on their weapons. Gunn is not interested. He and his friends do not believe Angel is on their side, and Gunn tells him not to show his face there again. But they do leave without killing Angel. At the office, Cordelia patches Angel up. She has got bandages wrapped all around his midsection. He is clearly still in a lot of pain. Wesley looks at the photos and says Nabbit will be very happy with their work. Angel claims he feels better. Cordelia asks if he wants to see the check again. He says no, he has to head out to help the kids. So these kids look to be pretty much the same age as Cordelia and Wesley. He says they are 16 or 17. None of them look that young, but that is that thing in Hollywood where typically teenagers are played by adults. Cordelia comments on how 20 minutes from crab puffs and champagne parties, kids are going to war. Angel says they've been doing this a long time. They've been pushed to it. And Wesley comments that he understands their stake first and ask questions later approach. It's how they've survived. Angel worries they'll get themselves killed. He thinks there must be a nest of vampires in the area, and he's going to find it before they do. I had to back up and rewatch this part because later on, I couldn't figure out how Angel knew about this nest of vampires. He didn't overhear anything, I don't think, so he is just guessing based on all their weapons, how prepared they are. It seems like kind of a big leap to me. It isn't that important to the story how Angel knows, but it makes it feel a little manufactured. He tells Wes to figure out where those kids live. He's guessing in about a 10-block radius from where he encountered them, and it must be a building with sewer access. He winces and groans a little when putting on his coat to get in the elevator to go help the kids, and he says, "Can I just see that check again?" The scene cuts to the vampires. Their leader talks about the stupid human street trash. The vampires ruled this neighborhood for 70 years. Decent people live there. Now he can't finish one without wanting to puke. It's not clear what that is a reference to. These vampires are mostly white, so it could be a racist type of reference. It could be because these kids can't exactly eat good food. We find out later they live on what they can steal from the grocery store or get out of the garbage bins. Or it could be a reference to drugs. Nothing suggests these kids are taking drugs, but perhaps in that neighborhood, that is what the vampires are encountering. Hard to say. But the leader, definitely not a great guy. He tells his gang that it is their own fault. They've gotten lazy and soft, and this street trash are not afraid to go for the heart. As he says it, he stakes the vampire through the heart that got lured into Alana's ambush. And he says the vampires are now going to go for the heart. This is the midpoint reversal for Charles Gunn. Even though Gunn does not know about it yet, this commitment by the antagonist drives the rest of the story. And that can be a really good way to construct a strong plot, is to have your antagonist make a major commitment in the middle, which simultaneously is going to be a reversal for a protagonist, because the antagonist's one job is to push against the protagonist, and that is what we have here. The scene cuts to Alana, who we'll find out is who the vampires see as the heart, probably because Gunn yelled her name back in that first fight that they had. She is now trying to persuade Gunn that Angel could be helpful to them. There is something different about him. She and Gunn joke a bit with each other, but he is skeptical about Angel. Gunn is working on a weapon. At the same time, Alana urges him to eat, asking when he last did. He says, seems like he just ate yesterday. It is clear he is eating less so that other people can eat. And earlier, when they got back to the warehouse, one of his friends said, I told those guys no squatters. There were some who apparently had snuck into the warehouse, and Gunn said, everybody eats. And the friend told them it was their lucky day. So clearly it's important to Charles Gunn to take care of people and do his best to make sure everyone is okay. Now Alana tells him they have more food. Two of the guys went to the market and no cops chased them this time. This bit of exposition comes out through some minor conflict where Gunn is upset that one of them went alone. She assures him he didn't and that it was okay. So this is how we know how the group gets food. Gunn hears noises outside, someone trying to get in. He yells for everyone to leave. Smoke bombs break through the glass. Gunn and another guy stay inside to fight. I'm not sure who they think it is. Maybe the police, because it is broad daylight and I don't think they're expecting vampires. No one comes in, and Gunn realizes it's a setup. Alana ran out fast, which is her bad luck. A van squeals up. Vampires covered head to toe in heavy clothes and wearing gas masks grab the vampire hunters who are outside, including Alana. So I don't know if the gas masks, if that is just a way to cover their faces from the sunlight, or if it's also so they don't inhale the smoke from the smoke bombs. Not clear, but they're able to be out. Gunn runs after the van, leaps onto the back bumper and through the back windows, sees the vampires start to bite Alana. Then one of them punches really hard right through the back window, knocking Gunn onto the street, and the van speeds away. Somewhere in the same neighborhood, but not where they see any of this happening, Cordelia and Wesley pull up in the convertible with the top down. The alley has rusted out barrels, overflowing trash bins. There's a man pushing a shopping cart. But Cordelia closes her eyes and imagines she's at the beach. She tells Wesley, you have to use your imagination. Wesley says these street kids must have electricity wherever they're living, so he will look for an illegal tap into the power lines while she talks to that man over there to see if he knows anything. She asks why she has to talk to the man, and he tells her because she can imagine him as a scantily clad young stud, while Wesley, who lacks imagination, is stuck with reality. Angel threatens a guy outside Gunn's warehouse to get him to invite him in. He finds Gunn and tells him that going after the nest of vamps is just what they want him to do, and Gunn responds, I don't need advice from some middle-class white dude that's dead. That is probably my favorite line from Gunn. Angel is not put off. He says that some of them will die and he can help them. Unless death is what Gunn is after, then he's on his own. After a little more back and forth, Gunn throws Angel into a meat locker and locks him in. Patron Melissa commented on the episode 5x5, the first one with Faith crossing over to Angel. And she says, when I started writing this comment, I was going to make a joke about how beloved Buffyverse villains like stealing leather coats from their victims. And then I realized there were more similarities between Faith and Spike highlighted in the episode. Definitely a top 5 Angel episode for me. I'm thinking about the way sex and violence is so intertwined, or the way their lives are more chaotic, or some might say spontaneous, than planned, which I hadn't thought much about until you pointed it out here. They both present Buffy with seductive Jungian shadow selves, and maybe that's a little bit why they are so beloved in the fandom. Yes, I agree on all counts. I hadn't really thought about the leather coat, but yeah, Faith steals that leather coat from the guy at the bus station, and Spike's leather coat, we find out eventually, is because he stole it from a slayer. And there are a lot of similarities. This mix of sex and violence is very strong. I had not thought about that, but for both Faith and Spike, that is true. Also, there's the chaos and there is a certain joy in life. Not so much in 5x5 because of where Faith has gotten to in her life. But if you go back to season 3 of Buffy, she is enjoying slaying in a way that Buffy does, but can't really acknowledge the same way. And Buffy doesn't quite have the same joy because Buffy is far more in touch with the duties of being a slayer, the burdens of it. She takes it more seriously, and she doesn't just blow off the things she doesn't like about it the way Faith does, and she is a bit more cautious and aware of the risk, not just to herself but to others, where Faith just dives in. And Spike, similarly, part of why he is beloved in the fandom, at least a large segment of the fandom, is, he's a vampire. He's evil before he gets his chip. Well, he's evil for some of that time too, but he loves undead life. Contrasted to a lot of vampires, it just seems like this is what they do. They have to eat, they're going to chase, they're going to hunt, but we don't necessarily see how they love it and love life as a whole. And even Angelus often is dark and brooding. He takes pleasure in torturing people and tormenting them, but he doesn't seem to just like really enjoy life the way Spike does. And when they are at their maybe best is the wrong word, because we don't want murderous vampires or slayers with kind of no guardrails. But when they are feeling their best, both Spike and Faith have this joy in life that is harder for Buffy to access. And then there is that shadow self aspect of abandoning yourself to the chaos, to the hunt, to the kill, to the thrill. And Buffy, when she briefly does that, immediately is brought back to Earth because she's arrested and then the mayor's deputy gets killed. Like, she immediately suffers the consequences. Faith suffers the consequences, but later. And you can see there is a seductiveness to you are powerful. What if you could just throw off all those constraints and just enjoy that power? It's essentially the argument that Alana is making, vampire Alana is making to Gunn here. You have all that hate and that anger, and now it's just the hunt, the kill. There isn't guilt. It isn't complicated. You can just be powerful and enjoy it. So I love those observations, Melissa, and thank you so much for commenting. The street kids take the truck to the warehouse where the vampires are. Gunn goes in first alone, tells his friends to come in after him in 10 minutes if he's not back and kill anything that moves. In the darkened warehouse, he sees only Alana. At first, he is relieved because she's humming and she's alive. She asks what took him so long to get there, and Gunn, at first grateful, says, "Oh God, you're not." And then he realizes what's happened and finishes dead. She tries to reassure him. She's stronger, faster, better than ever. And then she says, "Wanna see?" And she giggles and shoves him across the room. He goes flying. I see this as the last major plot turn. It comes out of that midpoint commitment by the antagonist to go for the heart, not just to kill Alana, but to make her into a vampire. And that was a major reversal for Gunn, and this is what he must now deal with. Alana tells Gunn that all that rage they have, now she can use it to hunt and kill. There's no guilt, no misery, no moping. It's all gone. Gunn, distraught, says he wasn't going to let anything happen to her. She was his sister. She tells him she still is, and she can free him. They can be together forever. Angel is trying to punch his way out of that meat locker, and he almost manages, but Cordelia and Wesley open it up for him. Wesley says he should have called on his cell phone, but he probably forgot he had it. Angel says they hardly ever work, and he's the boss, and he says when they use cell phones anyway, and people are going to die, and he has to go, and he heads out. I was trying to remember at that point if that was true of cell phones. There was a while, for those who don't remember, when the version of cell phones between those like brick-like car phones and the flip phones started to work pretty well. You could rely on them. Then came the original iPhone, which was not at all, in my experience, reliable for calls. So it was a joke that it could do all these things and someday maybe you could make a call on it. So Angel might have been right, but he clearly did forget or just does not like technology. Alana reminds Gunn of their past, talks about a shelter they lived in as kids and how brave Gunn was. She wanted to be just like him. He always watched out for her. And he doesn't have to anymore. It is her turn to look out for him. He doesn't have to run and hide, cold and hungry. That's not living. She tells him she'll fix it. She vamps out, moves close, and says, "Oh, say goodbye to everything you ever knew." Gunn almost embraces her, looks like that's what he's going to do. He says goodbye and stakes her. That probably is the climax of Gunn's story, although there is another moment to come. The climax should be the opposing forces having their final confrontation. So the antagonist here I talked about earlier being that lead vampire, and Gunn has not encountered him yet. And yet this feels like such a strong moment because Gunn has to, well, he doesn't have to, but he makes the choice to kill his sister. And she has, in that part of the story, stepped into the role of antagonist, and it's got much more emotional weight to it. Gunn does not care about that vampire leader other than to get revenge, but he loves Alana, and having to do this has got to be heartbreaking for him. Angel now comes into the warehouse. He has tracked them, and he says, let's get out of here. But the other vampires come in. They are shocked to find Angel just standing there with Gunn, but Gunn tells them to leave Angel alone and that they are leaving the group of street kids. But then that vampire leader comes in. He says no one is leaving, and he taunts Gunn about his sister and adds, they wanted a war, they got one. Angel now steps in and tells the vampires he'll give them a deal. If they leave now, they get to live, but they have to stay away. LA is his territory, and they can't come back. The leader scoffs. He's facing Angel, and he says something like, you know who you're talking to? And Angel says, name's Angelus. Stakes the leader and says, I wasn't actually talking to you. He looks at the other three vampires and asks if they want a truce or do they want to die, and one of them says truce. For a second, I wondered why, because it was 3-1, and then I realized all those street kids are there with all those weapons, and the vampires have encountered them before, and they dusted at least 2 of them, so it makes sense that they do the truce. Angel is the one who kills the leader and brokers this truce, not Gunn, which makes this scene a little less satisfying from Gunn's perspective. But because he and his group killed the other vampires, he clearly had a role in this. He was part of the threat against them. Now the street kids have to decide what they do about the truce. Are they going to accept it? And one of them says, we can take them. Looking at Gunn, Angel says, not without the vampires killing a few of them. The street kid asks Gunn, they came all this way. They're not going to kill any vampires. And Gunn says, I already did. This probably is the real climax, because while we've had the lead vampire and then Alana and then the vampire again serve as antagonists, Gunn's real battle here is internal. It is exactly what Alana put her finger on. Has he gotten so into the fight, so into going for the kill, that he is taking risks? And now, having had to kill his sister, he makes this change. You could also see that as part of the falling action, kind of tying up loose ends. If we see the action plot between Gunn and the vampires as the main plot and Gunn's character arc as a subplot. Either way, though, it is a key moment for Gunn, and it finishes out his storyline. Angel really had 2 subplots here, a very minor one about David Nabbit that was resolved. He did have to do things to get there. He had to go to Madame Dorian's, get the information, persuade them to help, and deal with the blackmailer, which was not easy, but pretty much that subplot finished when he managed to kill the demon and get back with the photos. Then he started a new subplot when he encountered Gunn and his friends and determined that he needed to help them, and that has resolved with him and Gunn working together. So now we are definitely in the falling action where the writers tie up those loose ends, resolve any subplots, and sometimes set up things for future episodes. Wesley and Cordelia walk in a park. Cordelia is thinking about those kids. She thought her first apartment was bad. Remember, she had the one with the cockroaches, but people are actually living in that warehouse. Wesley says it gives one a sense of perspective. Cordelia agrees and says, perspectively speaking, she might want to prostitute herself to billionaire David Nabbit. He's a nice guy who wants companionship. She could use security. And she goes on, so when I say prostitute, what I mean is, and Wesley says prostitute, and Cordelia says, for instance, maybe she could learn to love him, but the more she talks, the more she realizes she can't, and she ends with saying that she is fine here, poor, alone. And then we get an example of that perspective or relativity because we cut to Gunn, and he is staring out at the night from a spot high up on probably that warehouse building, looking out at LA, all the lights, and Angel joins him. Gunn is not that thrilled. He asks, what is Angel doing there? And Angel says, skulking professionally, which I really love. Gunn says he's glad for what Angel did, but it's not going to change the way things are. The vampires are going to keep coming, and his friends are going to keep fighting. Angel says he knows. And Gunn responds, that's it? You ain't gonna talk at me, be all daddy figure? This kind of feels weird because, again, these actors are not that far apart in age. I get that Angel is hundreds of years old, and we're told that Gunn is probably around 17 or 18. He probably knows that Angel must be very old, but I found that a little distracting. Angel just says, what am I gonna tell you that you haven't already learned? Gunn says he killed Alana. Angel says he didn't, but Gunn tells him near enough and that she was the reason. And he asks why Angel does this. And Angel says, what else am I going to do? I like that exchange because it felt more like a connection to people in a similar situation who are trying to protect the ones they care about and humans in general. Because what else are they going to do? Angel says he'll be around. Gunn says he doesn't need help. And Angel responds, I might, giving us a hint that we may see Gunn again. And there's a long shot of Gunn alone and the city's lights. And that is the end of the episode. You might be able to tell I did struggle a little bit with the plot here. Gunn is the protagonist. He is the main point of view character. We see the most from his perspective, especially considering it's Angel's show. We, of course, get a lot of Angel as well. And Gunn has the same active goal throughout, which is to protect the people he cares about. And in some ways, he is a great example of the steadfast hero. I did a Patreon bonus episode about that recently, about Buffy as the steadfast hero, which is a different kind of arc. That hero doesn't change their underlying values, their reason for being, but they may grow and change in other ways, and they may come to understand what they're doing differently. So Gunn here at the end, he is still the hero who is going to do everything he can to protect the people he cares about, but he has suffered this great loss. He has learned something about himself, and he may proceed in a somewhat different fashion. He's the main point of view character. He has an active goal throughout, and he has the most at stake. Angel here actually does have his life at stake, all the same because Gunn is human. He is, by definition, more vulnerable, and he has the lives of everyone around him, including Alana, at stake, where Angel in this episode is the only one. Cordelia and Wesley are not in danger in this episode. Those are the reasons I see Gunn as the protagonist in the plot with a nest of vampires. Angel is the protagonist in the subplot about David Nabbit, more or less, although Cordelia has a subplot there as well, kind of how she is dealing with the idea that there is this man who has all this money who could offer her the life she used to have. But the action part is mainly Angel's, and his subplot about trying to help and protect Gunn and his friends is his subplot. it works pretty well that Gunn has the antagonist shifting, the vampire leader, Alana, and himself. Where this feels a bit off is the way Angel fits in. Normally, we would see something like in 5x5, where Angel is the protagonist and Faith is the antagonist who is pushing against him, trying to kill him. And likewise, Faith is the protagonist in her storyline, trying to find her way. She latches on to killing Angel. He becomes the antagonist for her, but her antagonist really is also herself, somewhat like Gunn, but she and Angel are directly opposed. As I talked about in that episode, they cannot both win. Here, Gunn and Angel are crossing paths. They're influencing one another, but Gunn could prevail without Angel. It's possible. And certainly his internal journey could be done without Angel. And it's not that Angel has to be in a lot conflict with everyone or that he has to be the antagonist for Gunn. It is just very different to have an episode that is largely about a new character that we don't know yet and don't have reason to care about before this episode, and have Angel be almost a side note in his story, literally sidelined in the meat locker. Now, symbolically, Angel has a role. Being able to let Angel live stretches Gunn's stake first, ask questions later approach. It expands what he thinks of the world and of vampires, and his willingness to at least engage with Angel somewhat shows him taking a new path. But overall, it is hard for me as a viewer to care as much about this story because I am not that invested in Gunn. The last thing with this plot that threw me, and I only put my finger on it on breaking it down for the podcast, but it is that the backstory doesn't quite line up here. The vampires tell us they've been in this neighborhood for 70 years. Angel tells us, and we can see that Gunn and his friends have been in the neighborhood for some time, probably a couple years maybe. They have a warehouse. They've figured out how to get electricity. They found a way to eat. They're a group. They're a team. So it is not clear why now. Why does Gunn set up this ambush now if this has been ongoing? Alana tells us, Gunn just likes the fight too much. And I can believe that he is not content to just protect everyone. He wants to take the fight to the vampires and get rid of this nest for good. So I don't doubt his motivation, but we don't know why now and not 3 months ago or 3 months from now. And while consciously I did not pick up on that the first time I watched Angel, or even the second time I watched it all the way through, which I did during the pandemic, I think it is part of why this has never been a favorite episode for me. That question and jumping over how Angel figures out there's a nest of vampires. It really feels like the writers just want these things to happen. So we're just going to go with it. Moving on to the theme. What is this episode saying about the world? Clearly, there are themes about poverty, about these different worlds so close to one another. You have billionaires having parties with people they don't even know, and these street kids living in this warehouse. Alana and Gunn, we find out, have pretty much been in shelters, it seems like, their whole lives. They're eating by stealing food, and it's a struggle. We have those squatters who Gunn makes sure they eat, but we don't know what they do the rest of the time. So these different worlds. And I like that David Nabbit is not portrayed as evil. It would have been easy to set up the evil billionaire who doesn't care about anyone. No, we don't know if he donates any of his money to charity, if he has any foundations, if he tries to do anything about this world, if he even knows it's there. But he isn't presented as callous or not caring. He's not a super developed character, but we kind of like him. So it is more of an observation about the way the world is. And Angel talks about there's more than one world out there. I don't have a problem that there isn't necessarily a fix. That is what Gunn and Angel are essentially saying at the end. Gunn is doing everything he can, and he might not accept Angel's help, but there might be some sort of alliance between them. This theme about poverty and separate worlds and perspectives is also running through the David Nabbit subplot, particularly Cordelia's part of that, where she contemplates, could she imagine being with David Nabbit? And we see the layers of these different worlds and the layers of being poor. Cordelia says she's poor, but compared to these street kids, she is doing really well. She has that very nice apartment. She went through a lot to get it, and she couldn't have gotten it without the whole demon aspect, probably, but she does have it now. She doesn't have much extra money for anything, but we don't get the feeling that she doesn't have enough to eat, unlike Wesley, who maybe still is somewhat in that situation. Angel is paying him, but it may not be that much. At the party, he is the first to grab some of those crab cakes. And we saw before he was working for Angel that he was eating a lot at Cordelia's party because he just didn't have enough money for food. And yet still both of them are better off than these street kids. And then we have David Nabbit, who is so wealthy. Echoing those themes is one way to create more resonance between subplots that otherwise don't feel that connected. The David Nabbit action plot puts Angel into Gunn's orbit, but otherwise there is no connection there. And having this theme echoing, or at least exploring these questions, makes the episode feel more like one episode rather than two random stories that just happen to cross. There also are some themes about bias. Wesley talks about the stake first, ask questions later approach, that it's because that's what these street kids had to do to survive. And other than Angel, they're not wrong about vampires. We have those comments from the vampires as well about street trash. They don't like the way their neighborhood changed. Much more horrible than Gunn and his friends, who have needed this to survive. They have needed to stake the vampires to survive. Well, I suppose there is some element of protecting themselves, because they also don't like that these street kids will fight back, where it sounds like the more well-heeled residents, when it was a different neighborhood, did not put up a fight. The last theme I see is the question of getting lost in your mission or getting too invested in the chase, the hunt, the kill. So maybe not lost in the mission, but losing the thread of the mission. And that is something Angel has sometimes had to deal with himself. Is it about protecting people? Is it about being a hero? Is it about atonement for himself? Gunn has to deal with what part of him really wants that fight, and is that always wise? You can find back episodes of Buffy and the Art of Story, as well as the Buffy and the Art of Story books and all my fiction at lisalilly.com. To support the podcast, hear extra bonus content, and get each regular episode a few days early, join the Patreon community at patreon.com/Lisa M. Lilly. That's Lisa, M as in Marie, Lilly. Moving on to characters, there are a number of ways Gunn and Angel are parallels for one another that I've talked about, and it does make Gunn really interesting. His life is completely different from Angel's, yet they both have that mission to protect the people around them and humanity. On the Buffy fandom wiki, there was a note that the writers had wanted to have another vampire hunter who was very different from Angel and his team. So that is where the idea to create Gunn came from. So this is something of an origin story for the character of Charles Gunn. And on the site studiobinder.com, it says an origin story is a catalyst for the character's future actions or decisions. The origin story is pivotal in creating a depth of character and establishing their identity. They lay the groundwork for character development. This is part of, along with the comment at the end when Angel says, I might need your help, why I suspect we will see Charles Gunn in the future. We have spent almost a whole episode on him. It is also one of the challenges of the episode. When I tuned into the series Angel and saw the pilot, I expected to see an origin story for Angel in his own show, and I did. If I go to the movies to see Wonder Woman, I expect to see an origin story for Wonder Woman, unless it's a sequel. But here we are getting an origin story for a different character that we have not seen before, and we don't have a reason to be invested in. I think the writers do a good job of building who Gunn is. There is a lot to like about him. The fact that he wants everyone to be able to eat, even if it means he doesn't eat as much, his protectiveness toward his sister, his bravery, his competence, so many things. The challenge, though, is it isn't his show, and it feels like a lot of time. When Wesley was brought in, he was incorporated into Angel's show. Now, if you knew him from Buffy, you had some backstory on him, but you did not need it. It was all worked in, but it was worked in through a plot that involved Angel and Cordelia to a very large degree. And it was interesting to see how Wesley was integrated in. And then he, over a few episodes, became part of the team. This is asking us to spend a lot of time with a character in a world that we don't know. And when Gunn stakes his sister, it feels like it should be very moving. It is a hard choice for him. I do feel for him. Yet it does not really hit me. And part of it is I just haven't known these characters very long. And I came to the show expecting an Angel episode, and instead mostly got an episode about these new characters. And I'm just not sure that the amount of time you get in the episode with Gunn and his sister is going to be enough to make that as heartrending as it really is. And I particularly don't know Alana well enough. She too seems like a good person. She cares about her brother. She's a little more open-minded than he is about Angel. She's brave because she's willing to be the bait and lure the vampires into an ambush. I really want that moment to be heartbreaking, and I recognize that it must be for Gunn, but I don't really feel it. So that is a challenge of doing essentially an origin story for a character who is not a core character. We also have new character David Nabbit. I've already talked a bit about him. We like him because he is somewhat vulnerable, and he poses this interesting dilemma for Cordelia and reminds us that she came from a different world, one of those different worlds, and she has certainly evolved. Helping people matters to her. While she can't necessarily count on success as an actress, if money mattered the most to her, I'm sure she could get some other job that would pay more, but she stays with Angel because it's meaningful work. So Cordelia has changed, but it doesn't mean she doesn't miss that world, and that glimpse into it is very alluring to her. On Cordelia, her comment about those kids, when Angel says they're 16 or 17. If we look at the history on Buffy, she's about 19 years old right now, but she clearly sees Gunn and his friends as kids. and herself as an adult. So that tells me the show is portraying her more like what is probably Wesley's age, mid-20s. I commented about Gunn. I'm not sure if he is really supposed to be 17 or 18. Maybe he is supposed to be older, and Alana is more supposed to be 16, 17, and he could be a much older brother. But Cordelia is definitely making a general distinction between the street kids and herself. Moving on to world building, David Nabbit potentially changes the world of Angel. We don't know how much that check is, but it was big enough that Wesley initially doesn't want to accept it. He tries to tell him it is too much, and presumably David Nabbit paid them more when he got the photos. And this makes me think that perhaps the show is trying to alleviate some of the financial distress for Angel. It probably doesn't want to take us to where Cordelia could have the lifestyle she used to have, or that there's no money worries. But it suggests that Angel can keep focusing on helping people regardless of whether they have money, when they have had this one client who paid them a huge amount. And this is something anyone who writes this kind of a hero story has to deal with. How does that hero pay the bills? Now, you could just ignore it, but most audience members need some sort of a nod toward how this is done. In Buffy the Vampire Slayer, we had all these slayers, presumably most of them living with their family, or with Kendra, it seemed like maybe the whole community helped fund things, or her watcher did. We saw Buffy get this job at the burger place after her mom died because her mom was taking care of the finances. And there was that issue. Why does the Watchers Council not pay the Slayer? So it is interesting, much as I was somewhat critical of how the show handled the money issues, I do like that they tried to address it more directly. And here, Angel, as a PI in a noir sort of story, he has that concern too. Now, you may want to keep that pressure on your protagonist to have money be an issue. And it really depends how much is that part of the conflict that they face, how much time do you want them to spend on it. Here, maybe we're going to alleviate that a bit for Angel, at least for a time. It's unclear. But for right now, they don't need to worry too much about money. I dealt with this differently in my Awakening series. Initially, the main character, Tara's family, does not have a lot of money. Her parents had a lot of kids, and they are struggling a bit because one of them has serious health issues. But at some point in the series, just very minor spoilers if you're planning on reading it, she does come into a certain amount of money, and I did that mainly, it's a ways into the series, but so that in the last couple of books, I didn't have to constantly explain how could she be dealing with the issue she is and going around the world and fighting her enemies without having a way to feed herself. My other series, the QC Davis series, The Detective, is also an attorney. So I do make references to her having to pay the bills and pay her mortgage and knowing the prices of things. But generally, she does make money at that. So she can take on certain investigations without charging people. But she will talk about how she has to balance that. And that is a more realistic series. That is part of the deal. How does a PI deal with that case that they want to track down because it means so much to them, but they still have to cover the rent? So we'll see which way Angel goes with that. Another aspect of world building, we see Angel threatening a guy outside the warehouse where the street kids live to get an invitation in. So apparently, if you adopt what was probably an abandoned building and you set it up like a home, at some point it becomes enough of a home that a vampire cannot come in. Interesting, given that Angel was able to get into that guy's apartment where Faith was torturing Wesley without an invitation, but I feel like that's one of those that was probably just an oversight. Angel's use of his name as Angelus, telling the vampires that he is Angelus, raises an interesting question. Does that mean something to these vampires? Because they haven't seen him fight, so they don't necessarily have reason to be afraid of him. The street kids have seen him fight, but they haven't. So maybe there is lore about Angelus out there. Maybe a lot of vampires know it. Hard to say. It'll be interesting to see how that develops. Finally, we already knew this about Angel, but it adds to the sense of his mission when Gunn says, "Why do you do this?" And Angel says, "What else am I going to do?" That is Angel. That's who he is. And there really isn't for him another path that he wants to take. And he has made that choice over and over. Okay, so my rating of this episode is really difficult for me because objectively speaking, there is a lot that works in the episode. I like the themes. I do think Gunn is a well-drawn character. Ultimately, though, it is not an episode I look forward to rewatching. I like it better having broken it down for the podcast and seeing how many things are working well. But I don't love it. I don't know that I ever will love it because it is not what I come to Angel the series for. When I saw it the first time in Angel, I probably would have put it around a 3 or a 4. I don't think it's a badly written episode, but it just didn't appeal to me. And now, because I've looked more closely, I will put it at a 6. I would love to hear your thoughts, how this hit you. Where would you rate this episode and why, if you want to share that? And you can comment on YouTube, on Patreon, or by emailing me at buffystorypod@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and a special thank you to the patrons who support the podcast. Come back next time for Season 1, Episode 21, Blind Date, where the Wolfram and Hart attorney Lindsay McDonald comes to Angel for help to save a group of children from one of Wolfram and Hart's assassins. Music for this episode was written and performed by Robert Newcastle. Buffy and the Art of Story is a production of Spiny Woman, LLC. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved.